John, how do you rank the quarterbacks, or not quarterbacks, running backs heading into 2023, and who is in your top five? And you can feel free to mention anyone that doesn't make your top five as well.
So I'll be honest, this is like, to me, this is like kind of the lamest year of ranking running backs ever. It's like this weird transitionary period where I feel like half the names that are on this list right now probably might not be in the conversation like within the next 2 years whatsoever. I'm referring to like, think back 2 years ago, right? Like people were still probably putting Dalvin Cook or Ezekiel Elliott or some of these guys that aren't really fully in that conversation anymore. Some have fallen off a little harder than others, like Zeke. But I don't know. This year, it just felt weird. It felt like we're on the precipice of seeing some of the guys who I'm not going to have in this top five, but a Breece Hall, a Travis Etienne, maybe Bijan Robinson, some of these more younger guys like Javonte Williams, potentially all breaking into this top five within a year or two, and this list will look totally different. So I just wanted to put that disclaimer out there. Anyway, my number five, I had Josh Jacobs. It's weird because like he's had a good career, but a year ago we were talking about Josh Jacobs potentially losing his job and being replaced by the draft with Zamir White that they just gotten, and it looked like he was on the way out. And even if you look at like Josh Jacobs' career statistics, like he was just getting a ton of carries throughout his first handful of years with the Raiders, and it just felt like, oh, this is going to be doomed eventually because with how many touches they're giving him. I mean, look at Zeke, right? Like at some point, the amount of workload you give a guy is going to come back to bite him. Also, like his yards per carry wasn't super inspiring. Like his rookie year is 4.8, then 3.9, 4.0 for the next 2 years. So like not nearly as good as rookie season. His yardage total also decreased despite playing more games each year. So like the first 3 years were just so weird. And then all of a sudden last year, you get McDaniels who comes in. Josh Jacobs averages a career high in yards. Not average. He gets a career high in yards at 1,600 total rushing yards. He averages a career high in yards per attempt at 4.9, which is, a pretty elite number. He's getting 97 yards a game. Even receiving-wise, he gets 400 receiving yards, so he clips 2,000 yards total. He's on the all-pro teams. He's going to the Pro Bowl. Like, pretty crazy year for Josh Jacobs. So, I don't know. It's a strange situation where the running back position, I think, is just so fickle that Josh Jacobs having kind of back-to-back 2 mediocre years going into one really amazing year is kind of good enough to get you in the top 5. And that's no slight to Josh Jacobs. It's just that's how the running back position has kind of evolved. It's very much a what have you done for me lately? And lately, Josh Jacobs has kind of been that dude. So he's my number 5. Then I got Derrick Henry at number 4. Henry obviously has kind of started to been dealing with injuries. There's been stuff regarding his contract and maybe they'll trade him, which seems unlikely based on the running back position and all this kind of stuff. So Derrick Henry seems like the general consensus is he's potentially on the decline. And yet last year, he still had a really amazing season rushing for 1,500 yards and 13 touchdowns. So I don't know. It's Derrick Henry's career is also taking somewhat of a weird arc where like him having that 2,000 yard season seems to have maybe, I don't know, I guess risen the bar for him so high that like a 1,500 yard season doesn't seem to be impressive to people. It could be related to the fact that the year that he got 2,000, he averaged 5.4 yards per carry, to where this year he averaged 4.4 yards per carry. So his inefficiency is certainly going down, but he's still a top running back. And he also had like a career high in receiving last year with 400 total receiving yards. So I don't know. I still think that Derrick Henry is up there. It's just how much longer will he be up there? That's kind of the question to be seen, considering that over the last 5 years he's had like 1,500 total touches. So anyway, that's my number 4. At number 3, I have Jonathan Taylor. He's going through a whole lot of drama with wanting to be traded, and the Colts had a lot of weird stuff last year with the offensive line being worse, and I don't know. There was just a lot of stuff strange about Jonathan Taylor's season, But I think that, despite all that and the injuries and blah, 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 all this kind of stuff, he still had a decent year when he was playing. He had 11 games. He got 861 yards. It wasn't quite as dominant as his first 2 seasons where he, combined for almost 3,000 yards over those first 2 years rushing, including last year we had 1,800. So it wasn't quite as dominant, but like I said, there was just a lot of drama going on around the Colts. And so I expect Jonathan Taylor, if he does play, to bounce back and have another really solid year. It's just kind of the question is, will he play or will he go for the holdout kind of thing? We'll see. But Jonathan Taylor is my number 3. Then we go to the top 2. I have at number 2, Nick Chubb from the Cleveland Browns. The guy, he is like the model of consistency. I think that he has also greatly benefited from the fact that the Browns have taken that approach that I talked about earlier when we were talking about the teams with having multiple running backs on the roster. And I think that has really benefited him in terms of his overall touches. I mean, I'm looking at this, like last year he had a career high in touches at 302. Derrick Henry has eclipsed that number like 3 out of the last 4 years. So, and the 1 year that he didn't was due to injury. So yeah, like I think that that's been really great, but Nick Chubb is just like, when you talk about efficiency, every single year of his career, he's averaged over 5 yards an attempt. Last year, he has a career high in rushing yards at 1,500. He gets 12 touchdowns, which ties a career high. Receiving, he was also second best year of his career in terms of receiving yards at 239. So he's just starting to look real good. And like I said, a model of consistency. Although he isn't always playing every single game, last year he did play all 17. The 2 previous years he did miss some games. He's just always getting over 1,000 yards. He's always efficient, as I talked about. He's always putting up big touchdown numbers. And and that's despite the fact that the Browns haven't always had the greatest quarterback situations, haven't always had great receivers like they might this upcoming year with Deshaun Watson, maybe shaking off the rust. You got Amari Cooper coming in. So we could even see Nick Chubb having even better of a year now that there's other threats that the defense can focus on as well. So Nick Chubb is at number 2. And for me, at number 1, I still have Mr. Christian McCaffrey himself, the ultimate weapon for me when it comes to a running back. The fact that he's now in the Niners system, I mean, he was only there for, halfway through the season, I think, because he got traded at the trade deadline. So, I mean, last year, if you combine both teams, total, he had over 1,000 yards rushing. He had 750 receiving yards. Like, the guy is, he's just the complete package for a running back. So, I don't know. I think that having a full season with the 49ers, we could see some pretty special things in that very short, 10 games that he played for them, I think it was. He had 52 receptions for 464 yards. He had almost 1,000, 750. I won't say almost 1,000 because, but he had 750 rushing yards, and that was once again just in that 10 games. So over 1,000 yards in 10 games for the Niners. So I don't know. McCaffrey just, to me, still the cream of the crop for running backs because of the versatility that it can provide. And another year on the 49ers fully in their system, I think we could potentially see him have another one of those years where he gets 1,000 and 1,000. So, yeah, McCaffrey still the top dog for me, but which I don't think he was for me last year. I think I had him at number 3 behind Henry and Taylor. But
I have your top 5 from last year.
I believe it was Taylor, Henry, McCaffrey, Chubb, Cook, or Kamara.
No, you got it right on the nail. You got the nail right in the head. You had JT, Derrick Henry, CMC, Chubb, and Cook.
I was pretty sure. I mean, I knew the top 3 for sure. Then I figured I had Chubb at 4. And then it was between Cook or Kamara, I think, for my 6 based on last year. Anyway, point being, yeah, my list is somewhat similar. I move what was it? Both Henry and Taylor both down 2 spots. Chubb jumps up 2 spots. McCaffrey jumps up 2 spots. And then Dalvin Cook gets dropped out. And we bring in Josh Jacobs because of the dominant year he had. So I don't know, not too much movement. Like for me, the top 4 is still the same. It just is just positional differences. But yeah, that's my top 5.
Yeah. And real quick, anyone this year that you were like, man, like right on the outside looking in? Like, just throw names.
Saquon was certainly in there. He was definitely a consideration. I'm trying to think who else. I don't know. This maybe would be a little bit biased, but I for a second considered Tony Pollard, and then I was like, no, the body of work isn't fully there. We got to see him with a full year without Zeke, and then maybe he can have like a really dominant season. Quite frankly, if he didn't get hurt, I was fully prepared to put Breece Hall in here. But I'm not gonna lie. When I first made the list, before I checked the numbers, I was like, I'm gonna put Breece Hall in there. And then I looked back on the stats and I remembered he got injured in like week 5 or whatever it was, something super early, 6, 7, and he only had like 400 total yards. Now he was on pace for a pretty crazy season. I'm gonna actually pull it up real quick so I can say what he was potentially on pace for. He was on pace for a pretty solid year. It was just he wasn't unfortunately able to finish out the season. Yeah, I mean he played 7 games, but he only started 2. And I don't know if anybody remembers of the Jets. Like the first 3 weeks, I think he didn't like get more than 10, 15 carries. So he didn't have a ton of carries. He only had 80 attempts on the full season, but he had 463 yards at a 5.8 yards per carry, like average, which is pretty insane. And then receiving yards wise, he had 19 receptions for 218 yards at 11.5 yards per reception. Just to compare that to McCaffrey, 11.5 yards per reception. McCaffrey never even had a 10-point yards per reception. So he was putting up pretty explosive receiving yard stats, which that number also small sample size. So I will add that caveat because I think like one of those catches was like a 80-yard touchdown against the Broncos, I think. But yeah, like just pretty elite numbers. Even like McCaffrey's best season for yards per attempt is 5 yards. Breece Hall is putting up 5.8. Now, once again, small sample size, so over the course of the year, it might have balanced out, but he was on pace for pretty crazy yards. So my hot take would have been having him, but with only 2 starts, 80 carries, I wasn't quite ready to put that hot of a take. But next year, like I said at the beginning of this, I would not be surprised if I see maybe Josh Jacobs drop out if he doesn't have a dominant season, with the Raiders are just going through a lot of transition over there, and he's going through his contract stuff. Wouldn't be surprised if maybe Derrick Henry drops out due to the just wear and tear on him, and maybe we see like a Breece Hall, an ETN, a Javonte Williams, some of those kind of guys step in next year.